Okay, I am so happy I get to do this with Anthony, one of my best friends. Um, and
Likewise, I love being up here myself with Devin. So
he makes me feel very comfortable in a very uncomfortable situation.
yeah, whenever we match, it
Um,
makes him really uncomfortable. So
yeah.
I purposely did that to throw him off, and then he got instantly scared, and I went, haha, I got you. No. So
Can you let me talk?
go for it. Kick us off.
Okay. One of my favorite things about Christianity is this idea of heaven on earth. This idea that those signposts that's built into the earth that points to what's to come. Um, I think one of those signposts can be friendships or God in our friendships, pointing to what our relationships would be like in earth. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about through 1 Samuel 18 through 20.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of a recap, and for those who are visiting. So we've been having a sermon series going through the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and the theme that we've been going for is Give Us a King. So just kind of a recap. Last week we had really left off with David being anointed as the next king of Israel after defeating Goliath. And around this time, we're starting to see David quickly rise through the ranks. He was noticed by Saul and brought into his kingship, and is now sort of a servant to Saul. We already kind of know that 1 Samuel focuses really on David and his rise to becoming the king of Israel. And today we're going to be talking about a really important event that really kicked off the transition for his way into power, largely through a heavenly friendship. So the theme we're talking about today is heavenly friendship. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on how when we enter in an intimate, selfless, and committed friendship, we're exemplifying God's relationship with us. And we're going to read some scripture to kind of set the scene.
Yeah, I'm going to read 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 8, and then I'm going to summarize 19, and then Anthony gets to read all of 20, which I'm happy I don't have to do. Okay. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands and David has slain tens of thousands. Saul was very angry. His refrain was displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? So Saul is being Saul, and he's angry. He's angry at David, but he's also jealous because he's afraid that David is going to take the throne instead of his son, Jonathan. And then we get this thing where God leaves Saul and goes into David, and then God sends like an evil spirit into Saul, and we don't really know what that is, but it's something. And then Saul tries to kill David. First he throws a spear at him, and I imagine David does like a front flip or something and gets out of the way. And then he tries to send him into battle, hoping the Philistines would kill him. There's this whole thing where Saul offers him a wife, and David says no. David's too humble. He's like, I'm just a shepherd boy. I'm not fit for royalty. And then Saul tries again. He said, I'll give you Michal if you go and kill 100 Philistines. And then David's like, heck yeah. And then he goes and kills 200 Philistines and brings all the foreskins back to Saul.
Don't ask us about that. We don't know.
Then Jonathan continues to defend David. Saul makes an oath not to kill David. Then Saul tries to kill David. um, so David flees from Saul. David flees from Saul, and he finds Samuel. And then Saul sends man after them, but all his men end up prophesying. Then Saul goes after him himself, and Saul ends up prophesying as well. And that's like he's rolling around naked on the ground.
Yep.
Okay.
And so from there, we kind of see how David is now sort of sheltered. And then coming upon into 1 Samuel chapter 20, we start to really focus on sort of the big sort of climactic end to this story. So starting in verse 20, verse 1. Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything great or small without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." So David said, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I am supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan. If he says very well, then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" "Never," Jonathan said. "If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" David asked, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" "Come," Jonathan said, "let's go out into the field." So they went together. Then Jonathan said to David, "I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed towards you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed, and you do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed, because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began, and wait by the stone Ucella. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, 'Go, find the arrows.' If I say to him, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here,' then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe. There is no danger. But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever." So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat. When he sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers.' That is why he has not come to the king's table." Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On the second day of the feast, he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out to him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. The boy knew nothing about this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, "Go, carry them back to town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together. But David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. And that's where the story ends, or where it stops. And I'll let David.
Thank you, Anthony.
Of course.
So we're going to look at how David and Jonathan's friendships should inform our friendships today. And we're going to look at what God did through the friendship and what we can take away from it. And we found like there's 3 qualities: intimacy, selflessness, and commitment. So I'm going to talk about each of these, and then Anthony is going to be the bad person, and he's going to talk about how Saul. Well, I'm going to talk about Jonathan and David, and he's going to talk about how Saul handles all of these. The first one is intimacy, and well, it was like we're going to talk about the physical and the emotional intimacy. I'm going to do physical first so we can get that out of the way. I think when scholars interpret David and Jonathan, there's usually 2 different interpretations. This is very generalized, but it's that the relationship is only political, that they're only close friends to establish friendship between the 2 families. And then some other people say that they had a sexual relationship, that they were boyfriends having sex, something like that. I think that is because there's not we don't have a modern conception of an extremely close platonic friendship. Like in media, when there's 2 close friends, they usually start dating, and it's not very often where 2 friends just remain friends throughout the whole movie. And then same thing in life when we see people, especially 2 men, having affection for each other. We would assume that they're gay, which isn't a bad thing, but that's just what people would assume. And I think that deprives some people from a godly desire to connection, like physical connection, that you can only be in a relationship to have that type of connection. But I think we, as a church, do a good job of this. I had a PowerPoint night last year for my birthday, and if you don't know what that is, maybe you'll get invited next time.
It's a special invite.
And I invited some friends that don't go to DNC, and one of them was amazed at how affectionate all the guys were with each other, because he came from a background that was very taboo, and there's something he was really missing in his life. And also every Sunday, Manuel hugs me. He gives me a very long, affectionate hug, and he always initiates, and always makes me feel very, very loved. So it's true that God used David and Jonathan's friendship to place David on the throne, but that doesn't mean their physical affection was fake. It was just one aspect of the genuine friendship. The other part is emotional intimacy. And the Bible uses hesed to describe David and Jonathan's love. Whenever you see loyalty, faithfulness, kindness, love, or mercy, that is usually the word hesed being translated. And this involves a mutual obligation despite the status of each person, and its concrete expressions through actions, and ultimately illustrates God's love for us. It's the way God develops intimacy with us and how we can develop intimacy with friends. If we practice this on earth, maybe we'll get to show people a little bit of what all relationships would be like in heaven. One brief example of this, I was telling some friends that I get pretty depressed over Christmas time, and then they were like, "Oh, we'll come visit you and stay with you over Christmas," and that was so nice. That was just a act of love in action, and then they paid for my Airbnb. So
Yeah, and I think so. Obviously, with the story, there's a lot of layers to this piece, and so something that kind of in our study was also the other side, which is seeing Saul's relationship with God and how that unfolds. And I think we can also learn a lot about that, especially when we see how Jonathan and Saul both respond to David becoming king. So for me, the themes that kind of came up was sort of jealousy and distance, more specifically jealousy and enmity. And basically we kind of see in the story how Saul's jealousy ultimately leads to enmity, which is hostility towards David, but really it's also towards God. So just kind of a recap from last week. So far in the story, we've seen how Saul has already kind of broken a lot of the obligations of his kingship to God. And as such, God has started to pull away from Saul and move his spirit from him. And now we're starting to see that there's now this hostility between God and Saul. And the thing about this is that as we do this, this is also sort of a risk because Saul, in this time, the people chose a king to sort of be a mediator between them and God. So if Saul is now pulling away from God, therefore God's almost pulling away from Israel, which is something that we see a lot. And I think the main pull away from that is that we kind of see how Jonathan's love is almost counterbalancing Saul's jealousy and really trying to show from a sense of like bringing Israel still and maintaining that covenant. And I think as I was reading this, I thought back to John 13, which simply, Jesus tells us to love each other. And that's essentially how people will know that we're disciples. And I think what we can learn from this is that it's important for us to love others and acknowledge the blessings that they're receiving in life by seeing how God is moving in their lives. And I don't think jealousy just simply means envy. I can speak for myself. There's times where we kind of have this notion in culture where, we say surround yourself with the people who you want to be. And I think that is a good intention, but oftentimes people can sometimes be around trying to get something from someone else. And that's not really the kind of relationship I think that God wants us to have. Really wants us to be a love where we just appreciate who that person is and who we are and how God has made us each. And I think if I think back to it, I have a really good friend, Isaiah, who he's currently struggling to find a job and really hasn't been, able to find any employment. And then recently I've been able to really move into my profession. And I've always been very worried that there'd be jealousy, but not once has he expressed any jealousy. He's continued to love and celebrate me and even celebrate my promotions at work. And I think that's a good example of how someone who's choosing not to be jealous and not create distance because of how they feel or what they want. And that really comes from a notion of just loving me simply because we're brothers. And that's really what it means. But yeah, that's a good segue, I think, into a next big piece of a heavenly friendship.
yeah, the actions of a covenant friendship, or what we're calling a heavenly friendship, involves loving the other person through a demonstration of kindness regardless of the status of each person. So Jonathan was higher status than David. He was royalty. David was a shepherd's boy or whatever. But Jonathan passed down his kingship to David, and this is shown by giving David his robe, tunic, sword, bow, and belt, kind of saying, David, I want you to be the king. And this solidifies a friendship between the two instead of a rivalry, where in that time, people probably would have expected David to kill all of Saul's descendants, but this kind of established a friendship between the two. But it also points to God's relationship with us. I saw many parallels with what Jonathan did to what God does for us. So, like Jonathan did for David, God granted us into his family and gave us priesthood regardless of our status as sinful humans and his status as a perfect God. And this is in 1 Peter 2, 9 through 10 is an example of this. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are a people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So it's Jonathan giving David royalty, priesthood, and God also giving us priesthood, even though we're just humans. And also God demoted himself for us, just like Jonathan demoted his kingship for David. That's in Romans 5, 9 through 11. Since we have now justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. How much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation.
And so I think that's such a really good piece to think about, right? In the sense of how in a lot of our relationships, when it comes to God giving for us, like God is always thinking about us and we have nothing to give to him. And I think that's something that's really important that we also see in our friendship. So naturally, the opposite of that is selfishness, which I think is something that obviously we're very much aware of, kind of in the church and built of. But I think I want to look more at Saul and how we kind of see this selfishness come up. So if we look at Saul, Saul truly values being king more than God. He really values the idea that he's king versus actually cherishing God himself. And that is a sense of what selfishness can look like in our relationship with God. And this starts to really motivate Saul's actions. His focus is to keep all of the blessings and everything he's gotten from God. Because he's almost realizing, and I'm assuming if I'm putting myself in Saul, it's that realization of, oh, wow, I'm about to lose everything that God has given me. I'm going to lose my kingdom. I'm going to lose my heirship. And what's interesting about this is that in Saul's sort of just poor mental state and really just with the Spirit upon him, we start to see that the more he is trying to harm David by putting him into battle, by using his daughters as a term of like tempting him to go into battle more and to harm him, he's actually inadvertently blessing David. Like he kind of actually gives David more status with the people because he comes back winning battles, which I guess Saul forgot that David, killed Goliath. And so he thought, oh, this dude can probably, the guy defeated Goliath, and so he's coming back and winning battles, right? And then Saul has a better idea. He says, you know what? I'll give you my daughter, and that'll be cool too. And literally he's given him two important things that a king needs. He's given him status and power amongst the people, and he's given him inheritance and a lineage. He essentially made him prince. And so that's what's very funny is that even though despite that, God is still protecting and looking out for David because David is really close with God. David is God's chosen king. And so essentially what I took from this is that the more we bless our friends, the more God's love abounds. So the more that we are actually blessing our friends and sharing what we have with them versus restricting it, we're actually demonstrating God's selflessness. And we can also see how our friends are also supposed to protect us too. That's a big thing that we're supposed to do. And I think about Hebrews 13:16, which is basically just sharing how don't neglect to do good and share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. And when I think about this, I think about a lot of the numerous friends I've met in my life. I have a really good friend named Matt who's been really generous with me, just in the sense of just giving me a space to be safe and warm. I have a friend, Jacob, who, when he was here he recently left the country, but he had a home where he made it very livable and very dwelling and sharing those blessings with us. And I think that's something that's been really beautiful to see in my friendships, and even one with David. We kind of see how with God and that generosity, David also doesn't want to hold on to those blessings. He praises God for it. And I think that's a really important piece too, that we kind of get to see. And then of course, next to that, a really important piece of friendship, which is another big piece, is commitment. And I think Devin has some things to say on that.
Yeah, I think in friends there is not really much of a concept of vowing vows or promises. I think friendships are more temporary. When I look around here, all the people I went to college with and I was friends with are really not here anymore. There's a few, for those of you out there. But
I'm right here, Devin. I was gonna say Devin.
But most of them moved away. I'm not really friends with them anymore. And people move because of marriage or a job, but people rarely move or stay because of a friendship. Or to take that broader, people never really move or stray because of a community. But the Bible has a high view of friendship. The second commandment says to lay down your life for your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathan and David took this seriously through the covenant. David's side of the covenant was, I'm not going to read it because I don't have it in my notes, but that was David's side of the covenant, to really take care of Jonathan's family. And we see David do this. Most of Saul's sons die in battle, but one of them, Jonathan, adopts into his family. Saul adopts into his David adopts into his family. And just gives him like royalty. So that's David keeping his side of the covenant. And covenants are covenants are an agreement between two parties which relationship is formed involving ethical obligations. So that was David's ethical obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone else makes a lot of covenants, and that's God. He makes covenants all the time with humans, all throughout the Bible. It's really interesting to see the pattern of that, but you can take the Old Testament, New Testament class for that. But the thing is, humans, just like in friendships, often fail their side of the covenant. They often don't fulfill their obligation. But God does not let that stop him. Despite our failure, he still fulfilled his side of the covenant when Jesus died on the cross. So I think if we can look at that and try to be a little bit more like God in our friendships, it will show a lot to other people what good friendship is. And I think this whole idea of friendship isn't just to be happy or to just be with someone that you enjoy being around. I think it's really just a blessing, showing people what God's relationship can look like, at like a very practical way of seeing God's relationship on earth. And then by a byproduct of that is you were loved. But yeah.
No, and I think that's definitely where I want to pick up. So for me, the alternative of like breaking promises, and I think that was something that we both really learned in our studies, was how the worldly view of friendship seems very passive. If you think about it, when we go to college, it's just, I happen to sit next to this person in class, or, we had this like one niche hobby in common, or like we watched that one anime show together, so now we're like best friends, but then the season ends, you never see them again. Or what happens is that we tend to have sort of this belief that friends will come and go. So it's almost just kind of like we're just sitting, just letting people come by and whatnot. But if we actually look closer into what Scripture says, so I have a few points that I want to expand upon this, because I think commitment is a really big piece, and that's really a big solidifying factor, I think, from just a like friendship and heavenly friendship. And if we look at this, so first we want to go over how Saul breaks an oath to not harm David, in addition to the many other oaths he has made between God. This not only harms David, but the relationship with God. Now, if you have looked across Scripture, there's a really big theme that we see going back even in Deuteronomy all the way to Jesus, which there's sort of like this rule where it says never make an oath to somebody. That's usually an advice in Scripture, is never make a promise that you can't keep, because that is also like a really big sin according to this notion. It's a sense that when you break a promise, when you break an oath, it's a form of dishonesty, and it brings more division between people. And I think this is something that, one, is not just to give us caution of like making sure we're honest and knowing what our commitments are, but it's really making us pause and think about, why am I spending time with this person? What is it about this person I want to be with? Why am I doing this? And it's very intentional. And so we see that as Saul continues to break more of these oaths and promises, we are starting to see more of God's Spirit pull away from him. And we're starting to see how Jonathan is sort of counterbalancing that with his covenant. If we look back in chapter 20, we notice how Jonathan establishes this covenant, making a really long-lasting promise. And it's funny, but the best analogy I could think of this is almost like a wedding vow in some ways, which I think this is a radical notion, but I think sometimes a big difference is that maybe sometimes, especially as disciples, we need to think about what are our friendship vows. What are the things we're wanting to commit to in our friendships no matter what changes?
Yep, that's good.
And so when it comes to this, I think it's really important, though, to have grace and know that things will happen. People have to move. People will have families. Things come and go. But it's important for us that when we hold those commitments and the honor of saying, hey, we're still going to be friends no matter what, we're exemplifying God and how enduring he is with us. And so a couple examples, if we look at this, I think some examples could be how, friends will tend to ghost each other, or maybe friends will say, hey, let's get lunch sometime, but never actually follow through. Or maybe it's the notion that things are too complicated. I'm too busy. I can't hang out with friends because my house is messy. It's like, no. I think what God really calls us to do is to say, no, let's keep going together. And I think I really want to expand on this a little bit more. I know I'm aware of time, but something that was really coming up is I think this is a really important thing to think about now, just with things that are recently happening in our world, with how there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of adversity, and that can lead people to become very afraid, very scared. There are people that are losing jobs right now, people that are considering leaving or moving because they feel threatened or they don't feel safe. And also, too, this is a time where a lot of different opinions will show up. We have different political opinions or ideas of what God is saying. But I think what is important, though, is that going back to what Jonathan and David said, is that they make the commitment saying, God is between you and I. That is the one thing that will never change. And so that is what I think it means by the commitment, is that no matter what comes up, we are still able to hold with each other and support each other, even if that means a friend has to leave. And we see that with how Jonathan is saying, hey, you have to go away and do your own thing, but I won't forget you. Don't forget me. And I think Proverbs 17:17 says it very well. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. And I think what this means is that, simply put, regardless of the circumstances that are happening, we should strive to keep our friendships a priority as well. And that's, simply put, what I think is we see that with Jonathan and David through that. And that actually is really life-giving and kingdom-bringing, I think. I think that models how we're supposed to be with God. So in summary, as we look at the story of David and Jonathan, we see how they model what relationships are like in heaven. And by being intimate, selfless, and committed, we create heavenly friendships just as they did. And I think, Devin, you brought this up, and it was said last week, but these friendships can make pockets of heaven.
That's right.
And that's a really important thing that we should keep going through that. So there's a few takeaway questions that Devin and I came up with that we think are very practical and some things to kind of reflect on and pray about. I think the first question is, where is God in your friendships? Is God between you and the friendships you currently hold? How can you be more intimate, selfless, and or committed in your friendships? Does that look like maybe being intimate in the sense of being more vulnerable with someone else? Yeah. Does it mean, spending more time together? In terms of selflessness, does that mean paying for a friend's meal? And the committed piece, maybe it's looking at your friendship and having a DTR and talking about, what it is that you want to continue in your friendship and hold no matter what happens. And I think the third question too is, what tends to get in the way of your friendships? What are the excuses that you tend to make that maybe like not talk to people and not text them? I know for me, whenever I get really stressed, whenever I get scared, whenever I feel busy, I stop talking to my friends, and it's actually when I should talk to my friends the most. That's right. That's right. And I think that's another radical piece of, if I do that, I am being intimate and committed at the exact same time. And I've had to do that with Devin in our friendship. When I've struggled really hard and I went through a really bad mental health space, I had to tell all my friends that I wasn't okay. And doing that actually solidified those friendships. But that was scary and really tough. And so overall, those are some of the things that we've taken away. Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Devin?
Good job, buddy.
Good job, buddy. Love you. But yeah, thank you for that. And I hope you guys really enjoyed the sermon. Thanks for having us there. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for our sermon podcast. We would love for you to join us on Sunday morning or in one of our small groups during the week. And you can get more information about that at dentonnorthchurch.com.